Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Listeners, I hope you have your Orca cards with you because today we're going for a ride. Nathan Vass is an author, blogger, filmmaker, and a bus driver with Metro King County. He loves his job in huge part because of the people he gets to meet, and he's been writing about his everyday encounters with riders on his website. Some of these stories have been collected in the book The Lines That Make Us, Stories from Nathan's Bus, and he sits down with library volunteer Chris Snee to talk about them. Here's their conversation.
Hello and welcome to Literary Notes. I'm Chris Snee, and joining me in the studio today is Nathan Vass. Nathan is a filmmaker, photographer, author, and he also happens to drive buses for King County Metro. His book, The Lines That Make Us, Stories from Nathan's Bus, was published in 2018, and it's a collection of vignettes and character sketches from Nathan's perspective as he's driven passengers all throughout Seattle, something he's been doing since 2007. Nathan, it's good to have you here. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here.
I'd like to start our conversation today just kind of pulling on a thread from the preface of your book, where you talk about how you first were kind of cajoled into writing and blogging. It's something that your friends have kind of talked you into, I understand, and it's something you've kept up for 13 years now, which is no small thing.
I'm so grateful that I started. At the outset, I thought that it was both too much effort and that it wouldn't generate enough interest to make it worthwhile. Mm-hmm. But everyone has a bus story. Everyone loves hearing bus stories. As a bus driver, you get inundated with them.
Right.
And having the opportunity to channel those stories, those moments, some of which can be challenging, to channel them into something creative is really valuable for me. And I wrote about 3 stories a week for over 10 years, and I underestimated vastly how much work that is. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a lot of work to put these things together, and I spend a lot of time, especially on the last paragraph of every story, the last sentence. That's always the result of me sitting there for 45 minutes trying to figure out, what am I really trying to say here?
Right.
And I've backed off on how often I post on the blog, but I still post at the beginning of every month. There's always a monthly story. But one of the big reasons is because I've been working on other projects, another book, other film projects, and these take precedence. And I want to continue to share the stories with people, but in the form of a second book, for example, or this book.
So my understanding is you have a second book being published imminently, right?
Imminently.
We're recording this at the end of February, so...
Yeah, it comes out in April. It's been about 6 years in the works. And
wow.
A lot, and as we were speaking about earlier, a lot in Seattle has changed, and there's ample new material to discuss, and that's the substance of the second book.
Nice. Is it also from a driver's perspective, or is it a different lens?
There's just an endless backlog of stories, and you can repurpose them and sort of train them to focus on something new, and that's what the new book is. It's larger than this one. It's more personal. And it dives into the sort of challenges that we've all been either looking at or experiencing here in Seattle.
Sure. Something that I particularly enjoyed as a reader and then also as a narrator who sometimes has to kind of inhabit the characters that are put on the page.
That's right, yeah.
The authenticity of the dialogue that you've captured, it really brings these people to life in a way that I feel like is a tricky thing to do from an author's side.
I'm so glad. It's so gratifying to hear you say that. I try to capture what the people are saying with as much accuracy as possible. That's the most important thing to me. If I don't feel confident that I got the dialogue down, accurately, I don't write the story. I want it to be truthful because a truthful story has more value than, one that's made up or one that's embellished.
Sure.
And when you're phoneticizing the written word to match how people speak, there's always the risk of satire, of unintended parody.
Sure.
And that's not the intent here. We are spelling the words out in a way to hopefully suggest what it was like to be there listening to the person and to immerse the reader in that person's experience and how they speak. It's almost it's sort of a oral body language, how people choose to phrase their words and how they pronounce them. And there's a lot of meaning there, and I try to give that to the reader as
Yeah.
well.
So if you're managing to capture that while driving, you're doing some serious multitasking. How do you how do you pull it off?
I know it sounds hard, but it becomes easy after a while. If you're taking a road trip in your car, you think nothing of talking to your friend who's sitting next to you, listening to music, etc., paying attention to the road. These are all important things, and it's like reading and eating at the same time.
Okay.
Different parts of your brain, but you can do them simultaneously.
Right.
And I find it to be easy. Remembering the substance of the conversation, though, is a challenge. As soon as the person gets off the bus, then I'm praying for a red light or something, or to get to the terminal so I can scribble down some notes.
I see.
Because I want to get that down accurately. And that's a sort of muscle memory thing that gets easier over time, where often I'll start with the end of the conversation, what happened most recently, and then work my way backwards. That tends to work out pretty well.
That makes sense. So you said you were writing 3 stories a week for 10 years.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was too much. Yeah.
Too much.
Yeah.
And yet you still managed to pull this together. So as you were kind of putting this together and compiling it, what kind of stories were you trying to highlight and emphasize here?
This book is a sort of curation of what the stories that are the most personally meaningful to me from the blog. They're not what I think are the best stories from the blog in terms of writing. That's more what the second book is.
Okay.
This one is, here's my personal perspective of one way of looking at the world of the street, and how would we sum up the blog in 200 pages and give that to the reader?
Okay.
That was the idea. I always daydreamed about having a book version of the blog. I grew up working in a library, and that was my first job for 6 years at King County Library. And I love reading. I love literature. I'm always reading something. But I was so focused on writing the blog stories, I didn't put a lot of effort into how do I turn this into a book? And back then, blog to books were more popular than they are now, because blogs were more popular. And the genesis of this book was not me, but someone approaching me who was involved with UW Press, and they had pitched the book there, and decided instead to do it on their own because they had their own small imprint. Tom Eichmans is the guy I'm talking about who designed this book. He's a designer as well as has his own publishing imprint. And he just approached me out of the blue and said, would you be interested in making maybe a pamphlet? It wasn't even a book at that time. We thought, this will be something we hand out at art shows, maybe it has like 5 or 10 stories in it. And I thought that sounded exciting, and we both got excited, and the project began sort of ballooning. Let's add pictures, let's add more stories, and it got out of hand. We were going to have 60 stories in here, but he was like, "Hang on a second,
let's cut it in half."
Save something for later."
Right.
And so we whittled it down to these 30 stories, which are arranged hopefully in a sort of a emotional chronology, where you read it and you get to the end and it feels complete, even though it wasn't a singular plot thread going all the way through.
Right. So along the lines of plot threads, there's thematically, there's a sense of hope and optimism throughout these stories. And the characters that you show us are people who are often in crisis or are struggling just to get through the day on a day-to-day basis. With that optimism, what are you seeing in those people in those moments when they're at their lowest points or in the midst of a struggle that gives you hope, that gives you a sense that, these people are resonating in a way that is still positive and contributing?
Such a great question. I grew up riding the bus, and so it naturally occurs to me to consider the passengers as equals. And when you spend a lot of time around someone, you find it becomes easier to sympathize with them. And when I see these folks at their worst, I try to respect everyone. I was told in training class, respect everyone, especially the people that you think deserve it the least.
Hmm.
And because they're probably getting respected the least generally,
Sure.
and respect goes a long way. I talk to anybody on the street and they'll agree that the currency of the street is not money, but respect.
Hmm.
Acknowledgement, respect, these things go a really long way. And when I see people in their difficult times, I remind myself that I never know someone's full story.
Hmm.
I also remind myself of other moments where someone will come up to me and say, "Hey, I used to ride your bus when I was homeless. Now I have a job in an apartment."
Oh,
And I
wow.
can perceive the urgency with which it's important for them to tell me that. And I think it's because, although I'm mostly just a stranger to them, they need to tell me because I was the one who saw them when they were at their absolute
You're
worst.
still a recurring character for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they want me to know, look, they were able to transcend and rise above.
Hmm.
I hang on to those moments because I feel like one of the things this job has illuminated for me is we kind of see only what we're looking for.
Hmm.
Whatever outlook or perspective I have on humanity, I'm going to see evidence of when I go out there. And
Right.
that's a slippery slope. If I'm looking for the bad stuff, I'm going to see it.
Hmm.
But the obverse is also true. If I'm looking for the positive, I'll notice that more
Hmm.
regularly. And so it becomes a really dedicated practice of trying to sustain that muscle of searching for the good, looking for the good,
Yeah.
trying to foster it with my own behavior, hoping that it'll get mirrored.
Hmm.
That's really what keeps me going. The job feels like an exercise, and it's a character building or patience building
I
exercise
imagine, yes.
because there's many different ways to look at it.
Hmm.
And it's a mental exercise. You're inundated with all of humanity, and you have to decide, what do I make of this?
Hmm.
How am I going to think about it? Yeah.
So, this book was published in 2018, and I think it's fair to say that humanity's been through a little bit since then.
It sure has.
We've got,
Yeah.
a pandemic. Many people are concerned with what the new administration's doing in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yeah.
And closer to home, your colleague and friend, Sean Yim, was
Yeah.
horribly murdered by a passenger that he was driving through the U District. So, keeping with the theme of hope and optimism,
Yeah.
do you find it more difficult, or are you going through a different process to get to that optimism these days in light of everything that's kind of happened in the 7 years in between?
Terrific question, and one with many different answers that would all be valid. Yes, we have gone through difficult times. Um, we're all kind of, I think, shell-shocked from having to navigate a very unexpected emotional terrain in the
Mm-hmm.
last 5 years. And everyone, no matter where they are in terms of class or comfort or stability, everyone's a few rungs down on the ladder than where they were before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that breeds an overall atmosphere of struggle and frustration and a focus on survival. People are trying to survive, and survival is necessarily a self-absorbed act because you're thinking about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How can I survive? This is a breeding ground for apathy. It diminishes our ability to care for others. And in these challenging times, we have to, I find myself reflecting on how challenge is unpleasant and painful, but it causes us to be better people. There's an opportunity to improve ourselves
Mm-hmm.
when all the important moments of life involve pain. And this is the hard time. We're no longer living in between history. We are in
Right.
history.
It's sort of been a innocence lost in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah, very disillusioning. And it was possible to believe 10 years ago that the general trajectory of history involved incremental progress.
Mm-hmm.
And in answer to the question of are things getting worse? Are they the same? Is it a cycle? the answers to these questions change over time. In Germany in the late 30s, it would make sense to say things are getting worse. In Germany in the 50s, you would say something different. We're able to see things differently as we are able to move through these events. I find a lot of parallels looking at history, looking at the 1920s,
Right.
also coming out of a global pandemic,
Yeah.
also totally disillusioned and demoralized by World War I and corruption of leaders making terrible decisions that impact everybody.
Where's the optimism here, Nathan?
Exactly. A time of social strife and social agitation. And I remind myself, my arms reach out this wide. This is the sphere where I can affect change. I can't do anything outside of that sphere. But within the scope of the individual, I can be helpful. I can try to model good behavior. I can try to foster community and stewardship on an individual, if not on a larger level. And that's what I try to do. Sometimes all you can do is bear witness. And that's what I do on the street, and I offer respect. And that's what gets me through the days. In terms of Sean Yim, gosh, that's a tough one. Tragedies are things we can meet in a couple of different ways. I try to resist lapsing into a sort of fear-based perspective where I think that everyone on the street is potentially horrible and a threat. Right. I have to avoid that because I know that's not true.
Right.
I don't want us to make blanket sort of accusatory perspectives upon people and be afraid of everyone just because of the actions of this isolated incident.
Right.
The bus is the whole melting pot of the city compacted into this mobile living room.
Right.
It's one of the last places in America where people cannot get away from each other. And the fact that it almost always works out says something really positive.
Yeah.
I try to focus on that. And it was nice to see such a groundswell of support for operators.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's been disappointing to hear some of my colleagues coming from a much more fear-based place, where they want protections, they want the ability to defend themselves, etc. That is very understandable. I understand where they're coming from, and that makes sense. But my perspective is different. I spend more time on these routes that everyone is afraid of driving, and I drive them at the times that nobody wants to drive them at. And because of that exposure, I think I feel less afraid because I have more knowledge of, okay, well, this is what it's like. I'm not imagining awful things. I'm experiencing mostly pretty normal things that happen at night.
It's easy to kind of paint onto things we're less familiar with.
Exactly.
Our worst.
It's easier to be afraid of the other.
Right.
You know, the things or the
unknown.
people we don't know.
Yeah.
And driving the bus in the middle of the night on the 7 or the E line is not unknown to me. I've done those things. And I find them generally pretty manageable events, and I've noticed that, again, this will sound cliche, but respect, to bring that up again, makes such a difference on the street. Greeting the passengers as they come on, making eye contact, letting them know I care about them. Silence is sometimes misunderstood as disrespect, so I make sure that I engage.
Sure.
One time out of 1,000, it's better not to engage, and you only have a quarter of a second to make that call. And we humans make mistakes, but we learn from them and we move forward. And I have a great time out there, Chris. I love driving these routes. I love it.
That really comes through in the
I'm
writing.
so glad. I can't get enough. I still drive the 7. I love driving at night. Getting to be there with these folks feels so fulfilling for me. And finding ways to get along with all kinds of people.
So let's talk about all kinds of people. And You've been driving for a while now.
Yeah, 18 years.
18 years, okay.
Yeah, time flies.
Seattle's changed quite a bit, I would
Yeah.
argue, in those 18 years. How has the makeup of the mobile living room, as
Yeah.
you put it, how has that changed? And have you noticed a distinct difference, kind of post pandemic, or
Yeah.
is it more about the gentrification of Seattle, or
I would
what
say
are you
both.
seeing?
I
Okay.
feel like there's two pivot moments.
Mhm.
There's when Amazon came in and there was
Okay.
a major adjustment to the housing market.
Mhm.
Then there was COVID, when there's a huge change in what constitutes acceptable behavior on the street. All
Mhm.
these new drugs coming in,
Mhm.
a lack of enforcement, a sort of a different space where the street space and the bus space used to be delineated as two different things.
Mhm.
Now they feel the same.
Okay.
And the street space has always been, anything goes on the sidewalk, but on the bus, especially when people were expected to pay fare,
Mhm.
people behave differently when they have to pay for something.
Sure, yeah.
When transit was free for a while, it's very difficult to unlearn free anything,
Right.
and transit has more or less remained free as sort of an honor system,
Mhm.
up until now, and that has contributed, I think, to a change in behavior on the bus.
Okay.
People behave on the bus as they would on the street,
Hmm.
and that does make things less safe. And I'm not sure what the solution is there. People smarter than me are hopefully working on this. We'll
Yeah.
see, but it does create challenges. Um, Before COVID, all class groups rode the bus. Everybody was on the bus, and geographically, Seattle is laid out in such a way that different classes have to interact with each other.
Right.
Going out to Madrona, you have to go through working class and low income areas.
Mhm.
Same thing with a lot of these other upscale neighborhoods. And it was really exciting to see all of this coexistence.
Mhm.
Before COVID, I think people also felt safer, and I would
Sure.
talk. And when folks feel safe, they are more prone to open up.
Mhm.
And I would just spend 8 hours talking to people, just blabbing away. That was my strategy for getting through the day. If somebody was sitting in the front seat, I'd start talking to them, and it was so easy. That's no longer the case.
Hmm.
Post-COVID, we've got the shield there that makes it difficult for people to hear each other. They can't hear me, I
Yeah.
can't hear them. But also people feel less safe, and they withdraw, and the sort of trajectories that we were already on with smartphones and other
Yeah.
communications technology devices that cause us to alienate ourselves from others.
We're more insular, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, it's become more of a people's crave privacy and being away from others and solitude, and I'm just not like that. I like people.
Sure.
For me, it's more rewarding to interact with a real person than with a phone, and I can see that that's not the case for everyone else. And so it's been an adjustment to sort of try to shift to
Mhm.
this more lonesome space. I still have conversations. I still talk to people, but that happens less often.
Interesting. Okay.
Gentrification, sort of starting with when Amazon came in and the shift in the housing market and the changes in the nature of the street with COVID,
Mhm.
somehow these still feel very present as issues. When I go to New York, you can hardly tell the difference between post-COVID New York and it's like
Interesting. Okay.
I talk to my friends who live over there. They're like, "Oh, that was 5 years ago. In what way does that
Right.
affect today?" But for us, Seattle is it feels like a permanent dichotomy of before and after.
Yeah.
I don't know when we're going to get out of that, but it's a change, and I try to continue giving out what I do best, being nice to the people.
Right.
These humans continue to crave connection. We're not going to be able to eradicate the desire to connect, the desire to do something about the loneliness that humans are always pretending that we don't have. These are constants of the human condition.
Yeah.
And this book is about connection. The second book is also about connection, and the joy that can be found in that.
So with the second book,
Yeah.
Do you want to plug it? What's it called?
Okay,
What's going
yeah,
on?
yeah. It's called Deciding to See,
Okay.
The View from Nathan Vass. And that's in reference to what we were saying earlier about whatever perspective you have on humanity, you're going to see evidence of when you go out there. And so we forget how much of our outlook is up to us. How much of the things we notice. Modern life, I think, is sort of the act of editing because you're inundated with stimuli and you have to choose what to cut out. What are you going to pay attention to? We decide to see this perspective or to have faith in this idea. And the subtitle, The View from Nathan's Vass, is meant to underline that as well. This one is The Stories from Nathan's Vass. But both books are stories, and the second book is wrestling very deeply with all of these issues we're discussing. There are things that don't have easy answers. The new book is longer. It dives deeper into these things. It also touches on the importance of processing trauma by working through it rather than distracting ourselves or running away from it. I was in Paris in 2015. Perhaps you remember there were terrorist attacks in November of that year. I was in those attacks, and in the new book, I write about that, and because in both these books you have all these stories, and the one person who's in every single one of them is me. In this book, I don't reveal a lot of myself as a person. Unless
it's implied.
I think I'm revealing more than I realize. But in the second book, we do explore a little more. We talk about, well, all these other characters on the bus are going through stuff. What is the driver character going through?
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to process is this Paris terrorist trauma stuff. And I want the reader to use that, my experiences in Paris, as a proxy for whatever they've gone through or whatever they're working through. Everyone's working through some kind of trauma right now just because of the nature of the world.
Right.
And we're in that space of trying to think about how we think. How are we going to live? How will we treat others? How will we perceive others? These are the types of big questions I think we ask more often now. And the new book leans into that and tries to find hope in the context of community, recognizing that often the important moments of when we're processing our traumatic past or traumatic incidents happen in very mundane ways. You know, you're brushing your teeth on a Tuesday, or you have an interaction with a stranger on the sidewalk corner, and something clicks.
A memory just floats in.
Yeah. And or a new idea clicks of, this is how I can choose to see this.
Right.
This makes sense. Also, a positive interaction with a stranger carries enormous value because it gives you, on a neurochemical level, this deeply felt sense of belonging to the world at large, to society as a whole. That is not a sensation we feel when we have a great interaction with our friends or with our family, because our friends and family are not society at large.
There's an expectation built in.
Yeah. And those have their value. But when you have a wonderful moment, you're talking about the weather or something, or traffic, that has very important value that makes you feel good, makes us belong. And both of these books are celebrating that and trying to give the reader sort of an armchair version of what it's like to be with all these different folks. I feel lucky to have this job where I get to interact with all these people. Most people don't. You know, you've got your family and friends, you got your coworkers, maybe some other folks that you see on a day-to-day basis, but I have this unique situation where I'm just sandblasted with all of humanity every day. And this is an armchair version of that, look, these events that are mostly positive are just as real as anything else. They also are taking place, and they also deserve to play a role in how we see existence and each other.
That's well put, so it seems like in the layers of Nathan Vass, you are a bus driver, you're a creator. Is there a Venn diagram where the bus driver is in conversation with your filmmaking and photography layers as well, or is the bus driver is also the author, and then the filmmaking and the kind of visual arts are compartmentalized somewhere else?
Sometimes I'm driving the 7 and I'm southbound on 3rd Avenue
Okay.
between Yesler and, let's say, Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all those little art galleries
Yeah.
are, First Thursday and everything. And if I'm driving on a First Thursday, I've got all my peeps on the back of the bus. And that's one sort of sector of Seattle that I feel very comfortable with, and I know those people. And then you've got all the people outside in cocktail dresses and eating cheese and crackers and drinking wine and looking real nice. I know those people as well from my art world. And it's so wonderful I feel so lucky to get to be part of both of these communities. I see them as connected. At the end of the day, where all people are searching for similar goals, we are made joyous and sorrowful over similar things, and I like to channel my bus life into something artful.
Okay.
The architect John Young said that the bus driver is the best job for an artist to have, and we think he may have been referring to the fact that you
see such a broad
swath of life, and also there's the pragmatic angle of it. All the great artist day jobs are the ones where the job doesn't impinge on your private time.
Right.
It doesn't bleed into your off hours, and you don't have to stay late at the office and everything. And bus driving is like that.
So you are driving late at night from.
Yeah. I like to have the first half of the day be my creative time.
Okay.
And then I go drive the routes. It's a nice little sort of balance where if I drive during the day, it's busy.
Right.
There's traffic, there's cars, there's delivery trucks, there's school zones, there's kids, there's construction. All of that just evaporates at night. It's just you and the people.
See. Okay.
You're rolling around on empty streets with your half-empty bus, talking to folks. It's just more relaxing. I can't believe they're paying the same for me to drive at night as during the day, because they're such different jobs in terms of how intense they are. But also, after driving during the day, you get tired. You wouldn't think driving is tiring, but if you ever go on a road trip,
absolutely. Yeah.
spend 8 hours driving the car, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And when I would drive during the day, I would be tired at the end of the day, and I wouldn't want to be creative and, spend 6 hours working on the new book draft. But if I work in the second half of the day, I can spend the first half of the day writing, creating, working on photography. Then I go tool around on the empty bus for 8 hours. I can't do the graveyard shift. I'm not cool enough for that. I can't stay up that late. I don't want to be going home when it's starting to get light out.
You've been doing this for 18 years. You've got some pull. You could.
Oh gosh, I leave the graveyard shift to better folks than myself. But I think I'm straying from your question. You were asking about the art life and the bus life.
Yeah.
Do I see them as connected? Absolutely. And I see them as, yes, they're sort of anachronistically very different from each other. You could characterize one as more highbrow and one as more lowbrow, but it's nice to mix that up a little. These two books are an effort to impose a very highbrow perspective on what we might call lowbrow material. What I mean by highbrow in this instance is not a sense of judgment, but a sense of depth of analysis, consideration of context, bringing in other references from art, from history, and treating the world of the street as legitimate and worthy of our close and careful observation. It's really nice to do that, and I feel like art is so similar to me to breathing. It's just how I see the world.
Are there certain authors or artists who you have found inspirational in how they've engaged with that kind of subject matter?
Tons.
Who are some of your favorites?
I love that you ask this question because people sometimes ask, how am I able to have empathy for some of these individuals who behave so selfishly or cruelly to others, etc.? And I think narrative, especially in art, is the great empathy building machine, whether it's movies or books or plays. Stories allow us to immerse ourselves in the shoes of someone else's life. reading Tolstoy, for example. I grew up on the Tolstoy short stories.
Okay.
He's so good at articulating the lives and the depths of the working class, of peasants, of farmers. He tried to write in a very simple prose that would be understandable by all class groups. And I've always found that inspiring. I love 19th century literature. I devoured Thomas Hardy, George Eliot, Edith Wharton. And the first half of the 20th century is also such a great time for the novel. The Kafka short stories or Flannery O'Connor. O'Connor is really good at getting us to wrestle with how we think about someone, and she doesn't tell us how to judge or perceive the character she's writing about. We have to come up with our own interpretation. I like giving that to the reader, sort of dumping something interesting in the reader's lap and letting them come up with what to do with it. Yeah. And so, and films, of course, many great films about struggle. I respond a lot to artists, whether it's directors or authors, who are very intentional about using the form of their medium to elicit an emotional experience, whether it's Don DeLillo's very careful word choice. His prose reads like music. It's very rhythmic. Or Terrence Malick, the film director, using the camera in a way that's very emotionally involved. We feel things even if they're not spoken. And so with this book, I love that there's an audio version of it that you guys have created, because I read every story out loud before posting or publishing it, because it's important to me that it reads as something that has rhythm, that has a kineticism and a flow to it. Very few people will ever read these stories out loud. But
That's
even when
true.
you're reading silently, I want to believe that flow still gets to you and feels, you feel the rhythm of long and short sentences. You feel the starts and stops.
Yeah, as I said earlier, like the way you capture the dialogue in this, it really just breathes an authenticity into it in a way
so
that
glad.
So few stories manage to pull off.
I'm so glad. There's a professor at Seattle U who teaches this book to her English classes, and something that she observes is that she teaches a lot of urban studies texts, but not all of them are focused on humanizing the homeless folks to the point of naming them and letting them articulate their stories.
More about like theory of how.
Yeah, it's more about theory, the sort of the design of the streets and how they impact the movement of people, etc. And hopefully this book contributes something unique in that regard. I wasn't consciously trying to focus on that when I wrote this. It just made sense to write about these people I see all the time. But maybe it has value there too.
I would imagine so.
And I hope this book feels like a document of what the old Seattle felt like, where it was easier to talk to people, where it was possible to talk to the person next to you, and it wasn't weird. Maybe I'm looking at the past through rose-colored lenses, but it feels like it was easier to do that before.
I think there's something to that, yeah.
And if we lose that, these books are documents they're almost oral histories of this is what it was like to live in Seattle during these years. However, I tend to think that things are cyclic and that'll come back around in due time.
I hope you're right. I think that was a great conversation.
Chris, thank you so much. Any final questions?
No. Thank you for making the time today.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure.
So much to talk about. Thanks for reading this book, and I look forward to sharing the new one.
Absolutely. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much, Chris.
The Lines That Make Us, Stories from Nathan's Bus, is currently in production in the studios of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. We'll let you know in a later episode when you can find it as an audiobook in our catalog. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org. Or call us Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542 0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, based in Seattle, Washington. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.